Quintessentials, welcome back. Today we are doing a book review. Pamela Nomvete's Dancing to the Beat of the Drum. I absolutely loved every page of this book. I can't wait to tell you all about it. I've really been captured of late by Black female autobiographies. It's basically all I read, whether it's trying to understand the theoretical framework that makes Black female autobiographies, reading other literature reviews, reading other books, whether it's South African, whether it's from the UK, but mainly it has been South African and a bit of US Black female written books that I've been reading for the past year or two. So this book is Pamela Nomvete. I think if you're a South African, then you definitely know her. She is an icon in SA TV history. She was in her most popular role is that of Nsiki Lukele on Generations. I think that's where we all came to know and love her. She's a brilliant actor, brilliant actor. So basically this is a story about search for identity. It's a story about womanhood. So she was born in exile. Her father was an economist who worked for I think it's the AU or the EU, and I think it's the AU. She was born in Ethiopia, so she was traveling a lot, and she moved to Zimbabwe. She's just lived in various places on the continent, and obviously growing up in the UK. She speaks about her experiences of growing up in exile. She tells her story in chronological order, so from birth to, I think it ends about 2007. Let's just see, and it ends in 2007. When was it published? It was published in 2012, and she was sent to boarding school in the UK. She's got a very prominent European accent or a UK British accent. Pamela explains, her search for home, whether it was searching for home through people, searching for home as in when she was in exile, not fitting in, obviously, in Europe, coming back to South Africa, feeling like a foreigner, even though she was and remains South African, of the way that she speaks, and obviously she cannot speak any African languages, which is something that she mentions she deeply regrets. So the story really travels through all of her emotions and is really centered in, I would say, the main central trope is the search for home. It's the search for identity. It's the search for acceptance of fitting in. And it's also a book about self-discovery and her really understanding who she is through the telling of her story in this narrative. I don't want to give too much away of the book, but some of the things that I really want to settle on is really her relationships, number one, with men. I think she really revered her father. Her father was somebody who had authority, he had stature, he was respected, he had connections and relations with top people in the ANC back in the day that were also in exile. I mean, she mentions in the early pages of the book how Thabo Mbeki used to come through her house and babysit her, and that was before he was president, Thabo Mbeki. And she mentions that even after he was inaugurated as president, he never really met him again. And she also speaks of her encounters with former President Nelson Mandela, meeting Winnie Mandela, and how those experiences were very spiritual. They have stayed with her, and they had so much meaning to her, especially as she has been on the search for finding herself and her roots. The first time she met the former president was when she was performing, when she was invited with the cast of Generations, of course, to the president's house. He literally singled her out and congratulated her and told her what an amazing job she was doing, and she was really moved. And he invited her again, I think 2 or 3 other times, with her husband at the time, to explain her history, to talk about her father, where she comes from. She doesn't really go in detail into what was discussed with that meeting with former President Nelson Mandela, but you can tell that it was somebody that was important to her. The title of the book is explained early on. Dancing to the Beat of the Drum really has a spiritual connotation. I think she had met up with a traditional healer or a sangoma that had told her that she needs to dance to the beat of her drum, which is all basically her attempt at self-discovering and finding out who she is and where she comes from and where does she fit in, because she's always perhaps felt homeless. But when I was watching her interview actually on 3 Talk with Anele back in 2016, she mentions that home for her is not a physical place, it's not a land, it was her family. That was her home. She really enjoyed her childhood. She really had great memories of her childhood, and but home for her is not a physical place. Home for her is the people that she connects with, which is her mom, her dad, and her siblings. I don't want to give too much of the book away, but I want to stick to 2 main themes that for me really touched me and really spoke to me. So obviously she speaks about her journey of getting into generations. She was introduced to the role of Ntsiki by Sello Kancube. They were dating at the time and he was already on the soapy, and he mentioned that they were looking for a femme fatale character for the show and she should audition. So she did. She went for the auditions and she got the role. It was supposed to be 5-part feature, but it landed up being something longer. Because she had grown up in Europe, she came to South Africa in 1994, when it was obviously, the dawn of democracy. And she had intended to stay in South Africa for a very brief period and then return, I suppose, back to England or the UK. But her stay then became longer when she met this stud of a guy, and she also got this role in Generations, which then blew up and became this iconic moment in history and time. And she speaks about her discomfort with fame and how she wasn't actually ready for fame. She didn't enjoy fame. Opened up a lot of opportunities for her. She became being a broke actress to making a lot of money and being able to live comfortably. She was able to get in her own apartment, and time progressed. She broke up with Sello, but she was still on the show. People would stalk her, even in her home. She kept all the windows in her house closed because people were peering in. They were coming onto her lawn. They were knocking. People were bringing their children into her house. Even when she was out shopping, didn't let her rest because they just wanted to talk to Ntsiki. She was also harassed a few times and assaulted. I think she was slapped by a stranger like 2 or 3 times, at a store one time, because this fan was just so enraged by the character. And she explains how deeply people were connecting with her character. People were very invested in Generations. I mean, even myself growing up, standard practice that 8 o'clock, we're all in front of the TV catching up and watching. Where I connected with Pamela the most was obviously her vulnerability, her truthfulness in telling her story. Read the book, you can literally tell that she was absolutely nothing like her character on Generations. On Generations, she's feisty, she's in control, she's in charge, and in real life she was not. She mentions through her relationships, and they were quite toxic, most of them, if not all of them. Some of her experiences, and really they are quite devastating, but her story touched me because as a Black woman, I could relate to the things that she was going through. She mentions that one of them ghosted her. She mentions that she was in another relationship with a guy that was unavailable and in a relationship with someone else. But I think the most toxic relationship of all was with her husband, which for me, I just felt some of the things that she was tolerating in the 6-year relationship, and then for her to progress and even marry this guy, knowing fully well all the things that he'd done to her, for me, that really took me back. And I didn't even realize that she was abused until she herself mentioned it. She herself had written it in the pages of her book that she felt like she was abused. I just felt like, you know what, girl, you need to draw some boundaries. And obviously this guy was pushing the limits. So the husband was from Zimbabwe, and I think he was a fan, and really that was his meal ticket to whatever life that he wanted to live in South Africa, and really benefit from this woman who was on top of her game, who was, you know, the icon. And he also wanted status by associating with her. And I think because, you know, Pamela was searching for home and searching for herself, she needed to create a home for herself, despite the fact that it may have been toxic. I don't want to give too much of the book away, but just from my own analysis, I think she was desperate to create a home for herself because everybody in the outside world wanted to take from her. That was her talent. She had no privacy at all. And perhaps being in this relationship was supposed to create family for her, create stability, and it actually just went the complete opposite. She speaks of the way things spiraled to such an extent, he ended up becoming an alcoholic. But I feel the alcoholism literally came years later, I think, as an aftermath of the emotions just purging themselves and all the trauma and all the pain that she'd lived throughout those years. And she hadn't dealt with her emotions. Instead, she was just stuffing them down. And then another part of the book that I found to be really touching was searching for her spiritual home. That spiritual home being getting in touch with her ancestors. She was looking to connect on that level. And she mentions how she met with Credo Mutwa, who spoke into her life and told her that she had a prophetic gift. And even after she had met with Credo, a couple of years later, she met with another Sangoma because she was searching for answers, and he also confirmed that she had a prophetic gift. So cut to a couple of years later, and she then decides that she wants to try out Christianity. And she talks about how at this point, this was at the height, I think, of her depression. She even mentions that when she had worked with Dr. John Kani on you know, some of these things that I'm telling you, they sound like tea, but I mean, this is the gossip that she's giving. It's not really gossip when it's coming from the horse's mouth, but yeah, it's a juicy tale. She feels that Dr. John Kani basically labeled her negatively to her peers and in the industry by telling people that she had a nervous breakdown, which personally, after reading the book that she's explaining, she did have a nervous breakdown, especially because of the strain that she took from the abuse from her husband. She delves into Christianity, and one of the key moments that stood out for me was when she mentions that she made friends with these two almost like evil twins at the church, and God was speaking to her, but I feel she was also a bit out of touch with reality. She was just like on the opposite extreme. I'm a Christian myself, and I understand praying in tongues. I understand values that we hold as Christians, but then I feel like she was in almost like a cult type of a church, and things were just a bit on the extreme side, where she had this encounter and she had a message from God where he told her she needs to go to the SABC and pray and send a message to, you know, the executives there. She had left Generations at this point, and she even says she doesn't even know how the security people let her in, but she managed to get in. And they were praying in tongues quietly in the corridors of the SABC to break, obviously, whatever spiritual stronghold and expose, you know, whatever corruption was happening at the SABC. And when she explains it, she says that God deposited personal knowledge about this executive, this lady, to her, and she was telling her all these personal and private things that she was going through. And she shared the message with her, and the executive agreed that this is correct. What you're telling me is true. and she prayed and she left, and she mentions how she was not afraid to be a fool for God. Then from African traditional worship to getting into Christianity to then ultimately being a Buddhist, which I think she's still practicing to this day. So Black female autobiographies are really premised on the theory of self-discovery, and you can just tell as you read every page she's discovering herself. She talks about how she disrespected herself, and by her disrespecting herself, she allowed people to disrespect her, whether it was in her career. She tolerated a lot of abuse, perhaps in certain situations. She talks about her challenges in generations. The work ethic at a point was just not there. People were arriving at work drunk. You know, when I was reading that, I was like, I wonder which actors were those that were coming to work reeking of alcohol. Or she speaks of how scenes had to be postponed, or people had to sleep it off. Certain actors and actresses had to sleep it off. And the management and the executive producers were just not looking out for her. And because she was playing this character that South Africans love to hate, she felt like her life was in danger and she wasn't protected by the executives. They just wanted to basically make money off her. She was a product, and she didn't believe that she was a product. She believed that she was an artist. But because of her low self-esteem, which she herself talks about in the book, she tolerated a lot of abuse, and that abuse translated into her personal life as well. But this book is a quick read. It's an easy read, but it will also touch at your heartstrings, especially if you grew up watching Generations and you're now even following her career to this day. And I'm really happy to see that she's still on the screen and she's still acting despite some of the trauma that is so well articulated in this book. It's great to see that she's been able to literally rise from the ashes and make something of a bad situation. She doesn't wallow in her pain. She understands that it was there. It was there for a reason. It was there for a purpose. What I discovered by reading this book is the level of trauma that people that are born in exile actually experience, because there's the constant search of home. I've lived in South Africa. My family's South African. I speak Xhosa, you know. I'm secure in my identity. But this story really brought home to me the longing to fit in, the longing to be part of something that is your birthright, but for some reason you just can't seem to access it. And the search for identity is something that seems to be continual. I can't believe that a man can literally traumatize you to such an extent that he will leave you destitute of your own home, that you feel you need to vacate South Africa because there's nothing left for you here. Even career-wise, I suppose she felt she had done what she needed to do. And I know she comes in and out and she acts in a couple of series on a few channels here in South Africa, but ultimately she just could no longer live here in South Africa because of everything that she had gone through. And perhaps that is the journey. It was never gonna be forever. She stayed longer than expected initially, and she learned what she needed to learn, and she's moved on. So I really hope wherever she is that she's happy. And I think when you read this book, you'll be able to recognize pieces of yourself as a Black person, pieces of yourself as a Black woman, on the relationship front, on the career front, on every front. This is a book to read. It was very difficult to actually get it, even in the bookstores. I don't know what the issue is, or on that on its own is already speaking to some of the the challenges that are relayed in this book. So do buy this book and hit me up in the comments and let me know what your experience reading the book is. I mean, I literally cried at the end. It just became a bit too much to bear. So you will definitely be pleased.